Hello everyone, I welcome you all to today's 9 p.m. daily quiz. I hope all of you are doing good and you are ready to test your knowledge about the day's current affairs. As I say every single day, it doesn't matter wherever you read your current affairs from, make sure you come here to test your knowledge, whatever you have learned. Let's see if you are able to answer based on those. Today I have a total of 11 questions. Please attempt all of these. You can pause when the question is on the screen and see what your answer should be, and then you can check after replaying it. Do tell me in the comment section how many did you score. So giving you enough space to read the question, moving on to the first question here. India's exchange rate regime being classified as crawl-like has implications for the possible trinity. Which outcome best aligns with this classification? First, India prioritizes free capital mobility over monetary independence. Second, India ensures a fixed exchange rate with unrestricted capital flow. Third, India allows moderate exchange rate flexibility while retaining monetary autonomy and managing capital inflows. Fourth, India moves fully to hard peg limiting inflation targeting. Now, it's not that tricky to understand. If you actually see the option, you can eliminate a lot of them. So India moves to a hard peg limiting inflation targeting. No, inflation targeting is still very much a reality. As you know, the RBI targets inflation of 4% plus minus 2%. So the aim of India's policy is to make sure inflation is between 2 to 6%. India prioritizes free capital mobility over monetary independence? No. So the three problem, or the trinity problem as we say, is there are three factors that a country like India wants to manage together. First factor, the capital mobility. Second, the monetary independence. And third is the capital inflow. These are the three things that we have to manage together. That is how the policies are made. India ensures fixed exchange rate? No, we don't have any fixed exchange rate. It's a free floating exchange rate. The answer here is C. We allow moderate exchange rate flexibility while retaining monetary autonomy and managing capital inflow. This is the trinity, the three problems that any country, especially India, has to make sure that we counter very well. So the answer here, as I said, is C. Moving on to the second question for the day. This is question number 2. Which scenario most accurately reflects the doctrine of mutual constructive engagement among constitutional organs? This was a doctrine given by the Supreme Court recently, doctrine of mutual constructive engagement. First, Parliament delegates rule-making power, but the executive refuses to frame the rules. See, the question itself is about constructive engagement. So constructive engagement cannot be one organ refusing to do something for the other. Executive overrules judicial review? Again, no. Overruling something is not constructive. President returns the bill, Parliament passes it, again unchanged, not really. Judiciary issuing direction where legislative vacuum threatens fundamental rights? This is the correct answer. So Supreme Court basically is trying to justify that wherever Parliament is not doing its job properly, or wherever the action or inaction of the Parliament is threatening fundamental rights, Supreme Court says that it is our responsibility to step in. This is not any kind of interference, rather this is constructive engagement that we are doing with you. So the answer here has to be B. Moving on to the third question for today's quiz. In calculating the social cost of carbon, which assumption most strongly influences intergenerational equity judgments? Again, it's a technical term. Social cost of carbon. As you can see, it's about pollution and the cost that it has on our society. What assumption influences intergenerational equity? First, emission factor of coal. Second, discount rate applied to future damages. Third, carbon intensity of manufacturing. Or fourth, average forest carbon sequestration rate. So when we talk about how our pollution might impact the future generations as well, that is intergenerational equity, are we leaving the society in a better state as compared to how we found it for our future generations? What do we take into consideration? This, the discount rate applied to future damages, means the damage that today's events or today's activities will cause the future. This is taken into consideration when it comes to intergenerational equity. Even small changes can alter this social cost of carbon quite drastically. Moving on then to question number 4. Suppose India's Digital India Act creates a risk tier system for digital platforms. Which classification principle mirrors the EU's Digital Services Act and is most likely to be adopted? So basically what they're asking is EU already has a Digital Services Act. If India also does such an act, which of these provisions will most likely come to India as well? So in simple terms, to make it even easier, they're asking you which of these following features is actually a feature found in Digital Services Act of EU. Platforms classified by number of servers located in India, would we have this feature? Platforms classified by data storage duration, for how long do you store the data? Platforms will be classified by systemic risk, scale, cross-border impact, and harm potential. Or platforms will be classified only by revenue size. How will platform be classified in India if a similar act is introduced? All they're asking, how does EU classify their platforms? The answer is this. In EU's law, the platforms are classified by systemic risk, scale, cross-border impact, and harm potential. That is how different laws are made. That is how the platforms are given different set of rules to follow. The EU, that is the European Union, uses the Digital Services Act and takes into consideration the systemic risk a platform has, the scale of the platform, how many people are there, the social impact that the platform would have. All this is taken into consideration to rank these platforms. Moving on then to question number 5. A country controlling midstream processing in critical mineral supply chains gains disproportionate power because, it's a very important question, any country that controls midstream processing in critical mineral supply is very powerful. Why? Midstream is the most labor intensive segment. Midstream or upstream mining is fully automated now. Midstream determines purity, performance, and suitability for advanced applications. Sorry, I gave you the answer, but again, if you go back, 4th was downstream manufacturing becomes irrelevant once midstream is secured. Why is it that out of upstream, midstream, and downstream, the midstream processing is the one that holds the most importance? This is because of B. Midstream is the stage that determines the purity, performance, and suitability for advanced application for the critical minerals. Critical minerals have been in the news for a lot of reasons. We have discussed multiple questions on this. This is also the center of the trade war between China and the US. In this critical mineral engagement, the country that has the most power, most significance, will be the one that controls the midstream part, because this is where the minerals are classified according to their purity, according to their scale and applications. Moving on then to question number 6. Which development best indicates an early monetized economy in the postmodern period? So I have included a history question here as well, so that you can revise your static part as well if you have read history. Which development indicates early monetized economy in postmodern period? First, emergence of monolithic stupas. Did this, or is it something that indicates towards a monetized economy? Wide circulation of cast copper coins across multiple janpads. Proliferation of punch-marked coins alone, evidence of guild-based contracts using inscribed copper plates. Which of these is the best indication of a monetized economy in postmodern period? The answer here is C. Wide circulation of cast copper coins that were found across multiple janpads in the modern empire. Now, Mauryans and the Guptas, Mauryans more than the Guptas, are a very commonly asked topic in ancient history. So if you have read about them, it's good that you can revise that. In the prelims examination, you do see a lot of questions from the Mauryans of different types. So this is again the best indication, because these were the coins that show they were standardized medium of exchange for buying or selling of stuff. Next, question number 7. Quantum key distribution. It's a question of science and tech. Quantum key distribution provides information theoretic security. Which statement explains this precisely? Does it mean it depends on factoring large numbers faster than classical computers? Does it mean its security does not rely on computational assumptions, eavesdropping physically enters qubits? It requires AI-driven error correction, or it works only both parties use entangled photons? So what is the key feature of quantum key distribution? The answer here is B. the security of this system is not just relying on maths. It's not just relying on computational. It also looks into physical eavesdropping. Means, how do you keep your information secure? Most of these systems look into whether you have certain information, whether there are certain hackers that are trying to hack your system. But this quantum key distribution also looks into whether a person physically is trying to access the machine. Even that will alter the qubits and will give you an indication that the system has been compromised. This is why quantum key distribution QKD is more secure. It looks into physical eavesdropping as well if someone is physically trying to access your machine. Moving on to question number 8. A season shows unusually strong Madden-Julian oscillation amplitude during an ongoing El Nino year. What is the most probable impact on Indian monsoon rainfall? Again, understand this carefully. A season shows unusually strong Madden-Julian oscillation amplitude during an ongoing El Nino year. What is the most probable impact on Indian monsoon rainfall for this? First, entire monsoon will collapse irrespective of the MJO. MJO and El Nino cancel each other out. Strong MJO phases can temporarily enhance rainfall even during El Nino suppressed season. Fourth, ENSO becomes irrelevant for that year. Which of these will be the implication? It's a very core geography based question. The answer here is B. As I said, I'm trying to include some static questions as well here for your revision. This can actually bring rainfall even to those areas where rainfall was suppressed because of El Nino. This is the impact of strong Madden-Julian oscillation that you should have read in your geography. The answer here is B. Moving on to question number 9 then. A common operating picture, COP, in maritime domain awareness most fundamentally enables what? Collective warship procurement, replacement of Navy with a single multinational force, unified real-time map combining radars, AIS, satellite and human intelligence feeds, discovery of offshore oil reserves. It is in the news because India is in talks with the ASEAN countries to build a unified front for this purpose. The answer here is B. It will provide us a unified real-time map combining radars, satellites, and information sharing from multiple countries in the Indo-Pacific, an area that is extremely critical for all these countries, including India. Moving on to question number 10 then. India's position in the International Seabed Authority negotiations is rooted in which principle of UN clause? That is, UN Convention on Law of Sea. This is the body located in Jamaica. This is the one that determines up till what limit would a country have for their exclusive economic zone, for example. How does India negotiate? India's point is, we talk about freedom of navigation, coastal state absolute primacy, we talk about common heritage of mankind, or we talk about priority rights of developing states over high income states. What is India's point of negotiation? Why do we say this is such an important principle? Our argument is based on common heritage of mankind. Our argument is based on the fact that high seas, the sea which is not under control of any country, which does not fall into any country's exclusive economic zone, is a common heritage of mankind. Every country should have a right to it, and not just the developed ones, not just the ones who can afford to, like US, China, etc. All the countries should have equal right to it. The answer thus here is B. Moving on to the last question for the day. This is question number 11. All the very best. The new ASI, Archaeological Survey of India findings at Korkai provide insights into early trade networks. Korkai was historically known for which activity? Again, it's a question of current plus history. It was stone bead workshops linked to Indus Valley, known for pearl fisheries and Pandya maritime trade, known for grain distribution centers under the Satavahanas, or inland iron smelting belts of the Gangetic Plains. The Korkai network or the Korkai place, which is in the news, what was it known for? Tricky question. It was known for pearl fisheries and Pandya maritime trade. It was a very important center of trade for the Pandya dynasty. This is why it was known. It was a very, very famous Pandya port. This brings me to the end of today's quiz. We had 11 questions today. I hope you got most of these right. Do tell me in the comment section what is your score. If you're new here, do hit the subscribe button. Do join me tomorrow as well for 9 p.m. daily quiz. Invite your other friends as well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.